But there isn't really a right answer to structuring campaigns any more than there's a right answer to how to run a business. It depends what it is that you're trying to do. But what you can have is some sort of a toolkit to enable you to analyse and do it. And this is my shorthand version of how to do effective instrumental campaigns. In other words, campaigns which are using communications to get a result, not just to put an idea into somebody's head. But this also would be much the same if you were trying to do, say, a public awareness campaign which only went that far. Keep it simple, stupid, which is Mrs. Thatcher's favourite epithet. And most communications analysts of any sort will tell you that. A lot of people will be able to tell you that, but it's extremely hard to do. It's one of the most difficult things of all. That's why advertising copywriters get paid humongous amounts of money to produce what looks like something that people can think up on the back of the fact packet once you've seen it. Be visual, because most, in our society, we live in a very televisual world. Visual media are very dominant, so there's a sort of channel requirement. If you don't have pictures, and I've lost track of the number of times I've worked with people who wanted to get something on the TV, and when you ask them what it is, it turns out it doesn't move. And unless you're George Bush, nobody's going to go and stand outside a building and take a picture of the door and say behind that door something interesting is happening. You've got to have moving pictures for television. So that's a very, very basic thing that a lot of NGOs and government departments and all sorts of other people tend to forget. The only thing that's more powerful than visuals really is actually being there, physically experiencing something. So us talking face to face is more powerful than if I was being projected. That's more powerful than if you couldn't see the pictures. If you could just hear me, that's more powerful than if somebody else just told you about it, and so on. And right at the bottom of that are written facts and data and information. And that's partly just because of our hard wiring as animals. Create events, because without events there isn't any news, and if you want to use the news media or even features, it's very hard for anybody to write about what you want, your ideas, unless you've got consequences which are manifest by events, by somebody doing something. You don't walk into a room and say, what are people thinking? You walk into a room with a lot of people and say, what's going on? What's happened? And that's what a journalist will always want to write about. So if you can't tell them what you're going to do, you're not going to get people to talk about what you're doing. And as we'll come to in a minute, if you don't know what you want people to do, you can't produce an effective piece of communication. So create events are the stuff of news that drives politics as well. And tell stories. There's always a story about everything that you did. You'll have a story when you go away from this 2 days or whatever you're spending here about what it was like. You'll have a story about coming in here, and if the story is Chris Rose drove in the morning, it got very hot and it was boring, I can't remember everything he said. That's a bad story, but you're still going to have a story. Because when somebody asks you over coffee or on the train back home or something, what was that session like? You're not going to be able to summarise the whole thing. You're not going to write a précis. You're not going to begin and give them analysis. You'll have a story that you tell them. So everything you do will generate a story. And so think about the story that you want it to generate. And if you involve real people in it rather than principles, if your story is about the struggle of the man who wanted to popularise contraction and convergence in some little village somewhere at the United Nations, that's more interesting than reading a document and being told what the principle of the thing is. And that will stick, because stories psychologically are the stickiest form of communication, about the oldest form of communication. Be proactive, because those who are proactive in any struggle are usually the winners if you analyse them. And start from where your audience is. And if you just look through the agenda for this event, the last couple of that you've been involved in now, and ask yourself, who else apart from you lot and people like you, of whom there aren't very many, is starting from the interests that you've got? That isn't where most of the people that you want to influence are starting from. So then you've got a job to do, to think, how can we translate what we want to make happen to mean something in the lives of the people who are busy going about their everyday lives or have got their jobs to do. Starting from where your audience is a marketing principle as opposed to selling. So to sell something, if we wanted to sell bottled water, I'd start by telling you maybe how pure it is, and then if you don't show any interest, I'd start telling you a nice place it came from, and then maybe how it avoids the problems of tap water, and if you're still not interested, I might reduce the price. So you go on adding benefits and then maybe cutting the price, and that's selling. Whereas marketing would be to find out who was most likely to want to buy that sort of thing in the first place and target your efforts to them. The most effective campaigning is based on the second, not the first. Whereas debating and the construction of argument are really much more like the first, more like selling. So being able to win an argument has very little to do with winning a campaign. Well, we can probably all ride bikes, do job interviews and whatnot, but we know that with a bit of training and practice we can do better. And effective communication happens all the time. We don't notice it when it works, like it's designed. If you imagine for a moment you're in bed, in a hotel room, and you can smell smoke but you don't smoke, there's an issue that immediately springs to mind, and that's that the hotel's on fire. And if you find a fire, you expect to find a sign these days on the back of the wall, on the back of the door, something like this, and this is a good example of keep it simple, stupid. Number 1, raise the alarm, 2, go immediately to the place safety, 3, call the fire brigade. And that's an effective piece of communication, not, if it follows that sort of format, not just because it's simple, but because we know what we want the people to do. What we're trying to do with this piece of communication is to save the people. If we were trying to save the hotel, the first thing we want people to do is to call the fire brigade. But because we know it's not that, we can structure the communication into a sequence, which then becomes effective at saving people. And I imagine that it took a long time before these sorts of notices existed on the back of doors in hotel rooms. Probably to begin with, there weren't any people died, the insurance industry didn't like it, relatives didn't like it, people would be scraped up off the carpet. It would be in general pretty gory business. So eventually they decided they had to do something, and eventually they decided that the place to put the notice was on the back of the door. So they're beginning to decide where to put the communication. The other reason that this is effective is it follows a particular sequence, which I'll come to in a minute. But if you don't know what you want people to do, you can't produce an effective piece of communication. Now why is it then that a lot of our communication, whether we're a government department or a public body or an NGO, tends to look much more like this? This is about the same subject. This is about fire. But what's happening here is that people who know a lot about fire are telling you all about fire. And a lot of the reasons that climate communication efforts have failed is that they start from an embedded assumption that we have to explain to people how climate change works. When you're selling somebody a car, you don't explain to them how a car works in order to motivate them to get to buy a car. You don't explain to people how a high-definition TV works in order to get them to buy a new TV. So why should we think that we need to educate people about something like climate change in order to get them to act? So network with your neighbours, explain the issues, consultation, field effects, how the whole thing works. Don't forget the important social and economic justice dimensions, and get an adequately resourced fire brigade. This is probably the internal agenda that these people had to go through in order to get the agreements to go out and communicate, and it slipped out into the public domain. So if ever you see that happening to your communications, knock it on the head and go back and start again and try and make it much simpler. But above all, these people have lost sight of what they're trying to do. They're educating people about fire, whereas actually what they ought to be doing is getting them out of the building. The reason that the first one is effective is it follows this sequence, which is perhaps the oldest sort of campaign planning sequence there is, which is borrowed for advertising and marketing and so on. Awareness, alignment, engagement, action. Fire, we're all in danger, let's go this way, we're leaving. Now in the case of fire, getting alignment, which is seeing the problem and solution in the same ways as the messenger does, is a relatively easy task because we know about fire. In the case of the issue of, so-called issue of climate change, it's much more difficult because it's multifaceted, hundreds of different causes, hundreds of different possible and alternate causes, hundreds of different possible actions. But if you don't get alignment, you can give people as many engagement mechanisms, ways of taking action as you like. And you can urge